morning dish.
He's the hardest working man in show business. His band's music takes you into the midnight hours. And when you wake up, his voice is back on your radio alarm clock. How on earth did this happen?
Well, Jeff saw me taking out the trash at the radio station.
And he won another award.
But this one is better.
I'm your boogeyman. That's what I am.
It's the Morning Dish with the 2019 Radio Personality of the Year winner, Stephen Phillips.
You paying attention to this, Packy?
And Murphy's own Sherry Raines.
Yeah, you must have given horseback passes to the right guy, Stephen.
Well, giddy up.
And Packy Smith's Shetland pony is right alongside.
You guys know these demo tapes don't just edit themselves together, right?
Well, all right.
3 cheers for Stephen Phillips.
Y'all need to help Stephen Phillips out over there. Out the door and off the radio.
Here's Stephen Phillips.
Well, we're back with you. We have got Michael Myers, and I'm telling you, this guy has served the military and still serving the military as we speak. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
Man, I'm glad to have you. You do a lot of stuff. You was actually in the military. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your? You've been awarded the Purple Heart. I mean, you've got a lot of history here that is very respectful, and we appreciate. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. My father was a 31-year naval officer, so it was my destiny to end up in the military. But my young girlfriend at the time, pregnant, and I made a young decision to take care of my child. So I joined the Army the day after I got married at 17 years old.
Wow.
I was an enlisted man for 3 years, and of course, I'd traveled all over the world with my dad, but I started traveling. I ended up in Alaska and of course, Fort Benning, and went infantry. And eventually, I was selected to become an officer, and I went to OCS there at Fort Benning, Georgia, and became a young officer. And they sent me through some ranger training and jungle training in Panama before they sent me to Vietnam at 21 years old.
Wow.
So I was enlisted for about 3 years, and then I became an officer. And unfortunately, I joined my rifle platoon in 1968 during the Tet Offensive of 68.
Right.
The bloodiest years of the war.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 21, 22. And I just realized, this is it. I'm in it. And I was fortunate. I lived through it. And I think there was I got 126 officers of us that went over.
Yeah.
And 9 of us came back, and all of us were wounded. So I did get the Purple Heart for wounds received in action.
I'm going to tell you.
So I had go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just, to me, being in a combat, knowing that somebody's trying to kill you, I just cannot imagine going through that. And honestly, I just appreciate all the veterans that's been through that. And I'd like to say I appreciate what you've done for your country.
Yeah. Thank you. Words like that mean a lot, and I always tell people if you want to see a Vietnam veteran turn to jelly, just give him a hug and say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We miss that. We didn't get all that, And there's a statistic that I always share with people, and that's that in the World War II, the war that we won, where we were treated with parades and heroes, famous kiss pictures, and in World War II, the average infantry soldier. Now, granted, they fought some tremendous battles. My father was there. I had uncles there.
Mm-hmm.
I had an uncle who was a B-17 pilot and a jet pilot in Korea and forward air control in Vietnam. Just lost him recently. Just lost my good friend Joseph L. Galloway,
mm-hmm.
that wrote Soldiers, We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
Mm-hmm.
Had breakfast with him just on 2 months ago, June, on D-Day, as a matter of fact.
Wow. And
I noticed that he also suffered from PTSD. But I went to Vietnam as a young infantry officer, 21, 22, and I always tell people that to hold your head up high, to be proud of what you did. But we didn't get the parades. And the World War II veteran,
right,
the combat veteran, in 4 years saw an average of a little over 44 days of actual fighting combat.
Mm-hmm.
And the Vietnam soldier, infantry soldier, in 1 year saw an average of over 200 days of actual fighting combat.
Wow.
It was a bloody, messy war. It was horrible. I was there in the worst years. I was only 21, 22, so I have real mixed emotions when I hear somebody say, well, he's just a kid, he's 22. I mean, it's just no concept, because when I was 21 and 22, somehow through all the blood and guts and this bloody war that I had to live through, I realized that I was an old man. I had experienced things that people don't get to experience in a lifetime in this short year and a half.
You're right.
And now that I'm older, a piece of me is still 21 and 22 because part of me died there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like you lost your youth.
But now,
to come home to our wonderful country and nothing to nothing.
right.
I'll share with you just one experience I had. When I had a layover in San Francisco when I was coming home, I just left the field. The guys were always saying, don't wear a uniform, keep a low profile. And I thought, well, why? No, that's nonsense. This is America.
Right.
So I wore my officer's uniform, decorated Purple Heart on it, and did my duty. And I came home and I stopped in San Francisco. And when I was going to take a taxi across the Golden Gate to Sausalito and see if I could find a lounge to unwind.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out of the airport, here's all these hundreds of demonstrators. I still have a picture of it. And placards that said baby killer, murderer, and things like that. And so that's the first thing I saw. Then I went across the Golden Gate, and I realized everybody was in this tremendous hurry. Everybody's driving fast and trying to get where they're going. And, where are they going? Nowhere. So I realized that they're just living their lives. So eventually I got to this lounge, and I sat in there alone with my uniform.
Right.
I sat at a coffee table with my legs stretched out on the coffee table, trying to let go of everything because I just left the field.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching these little sailboats float, and there was Americans in there. I hadn't been around Americans in a long time. There were Americans in there, and they were laughing and drinking and having fun. And it bothered me that they were laughing,
Right.
No, I wanted somebody to come over and pat me on the back and say, good job, or welcome home, or something, but
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And I'm trying to let go of the blood and the guts and the death and the dying and the guilt of surviving and the soldiers I lost and the people we killed. And I'm trying to let go of all that. And I realized something. I realized that nobody cared. They just didn't care. That war 10,000 miles away. I was just another guy they saw in a uniform coming home from the unpopular war. So I was what they refer to as one of those lost veterans.
Right.
I ended up going up into the mountains of Blue Lake, California,
Mm-hmm.
above Arcata, in the northernmost regions of California, in the redwoods, the old logging trail roads. Lived with me and my dogs, 2 dogs, for a year.
Right.
And I used to have to brace myself when I went to town because I was scared to death somebody was going to try and talk to me. And I learned I hated society.
Right.
I didn't want to talk to anybody. And if I could go on just a little bit more, I eventually came down the early to mid-'80s, to a Vietnam Veteran Outreach Center that was brand new. My friend Max Cleland started them.
Right.
And if he's out there, let's say hello to Max. He's a Georgia boy.
There you go.
He'll remember me. And but I went down to that vet center, and I was an officer, so there was a little distance, There was a little separation from the guys, and most of the guys were listening. They were telling their stories, and so I didn't talk much. I just listened, and I kept listening to the same story, and it was very similar to my story. Well, at the end of that session, a guy named Jack Jones was a counselor there. The last I heard, he was the head of the VA outreach centers in Hawaii, but he took me in his office and he asked me some questions like, do I have trouble keeping a job? Do I have trouble keeping my thoughts in one area? Do I have trouble with people, society? How about relationships? And I'm going, yeah. And he said, well, look in the mirror. And I looked in this mirror, and he said, maybe you're the problem. And that's the first day I started healing.
Right.
And it was the beginning of the end of what I refer to as my post-Vietnam drift, 10 years.
Right.
And so I started healing, and a psychiatrist said, you're different than any other Vietnam veteran I met. They usually run from it. Somehow you've turned and embraced it. And then he suggested I write. So I I was part of in the 1980s. I was part of the input for the Vietnam War stories. HBO's first successful series.
Right.
So I was part of the input of that, and then so I took 6 steno pads, sat in front of my house, and just put everything down that I could remember. No context, no outline, or just regurgitated all this, what I could remember.
Right.
And then later on, I realized that all I'd done was scratch the surface. So I took those steno pads and I wrote my first play. I was also an actor, so I was acting and lived in California for about 25 years.
Right.
And I was acting and doing commercials, and I started writing. And I wrote my first play because I knew blocking, I knew direction, and so forth. And I invited about 100 people, did it with a hotel that provided a dinner and so forth. I called it Badges of Honor, and a reporter asked me what that was concerning. I said, that's not about medals. It's about our dreams. That our dreams are our badges of honor, our little notations that we need to live our life in dignity, for these guys that died.
Right. So I wrote that, and it was real popular. Everybody had invited about 100 friends, and it went really well. So I broke it down into 3 one-act plays, and I took one called A Healing of War, entered into a play festival for something to do, and that was about 15 other plays. And when we were rehearsing the play, the other plays, the directors, cast, we had half a full house just watching us do rehearsal. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, we heard this is such a good play." Oh, wow.
So I wrote this play, and it won the play festival. I won 6 awards that night, including best play, best audience choice play, and so it surprised me. I mean, it surprised me that people were enjoying what I was writing. Mm-hmm. But the thing that it was about was healing and remembering the pride and coming together and recognizing PTSD, and it was a healing tool. So I entered 3 the next year, and I won even more awards the following year. The play, A Healing War, ended up at the Will Rogers Auditorium in Texas. It ended up in D.C. and Silver Spring, Maryland. It was in Virginia. It won the play festival. Different groups did it.
Wow.
And I remember one time I was in the audience up in D.C., and they introduced me, which was a real honor. And a young Iraqi Marine came over to me and said, "I want to thank you." He said, I could tell you were there by the things you said and the words you said. And I realized that, hey, that kid benefited from this. So,
oh, yeah.
And then another time I lived up in the Redwoods. 10 years later, I lived in the Redwoods again, and I had a get-together once, and a guy cornered me and he said, "I want to tell you something. You said something 10 years ago that changed my life." And he was another Vietnam veteran. I said, "Really? What was that?" He said, like any other good veteran, he said, "I don't want to go into that, but I just want you to know that you changed my life." So I knew that my writing was helping people.
Yeah.
So my most recent work, we know about the suicide rates of veterans. I think 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, it was 22 a day, mostly Vietnam veterans, but we have a lot of troubled new veterans now from the last 20 years of the war. So we have a lot of troubled veterans, and so I wrote, but we don't know who these people are. So I wrote one originally I called it A Soldier's Final Act of Kindness.
Right.
And then I changed it to a Soldier's Final Act of Redemption. Mm-hmm. And then it progressed to A Soldier's Final Act. And it's taken one of these soldiers, and it's based on my ghosts, my stories, and so forth. And it's about a veteran that rents a hotel room, like HBO's get this thing called Room 104 or 401, I can't remember which.
Right.
But all these things happen in this room. So I decided, okay, I can take a hotel room and I can put this proud veteran in there, fighting with his ghost, talking to his ghost. He's made the illogical assumption to end his life. He's leaving his wife and his child, but he's still reaching out. He's calling the Veterans Administration, his therapist, the doctor, and his wife. He's still looking for help, but he's made this decision, this erroneous decision, to end his life, which he eventually walks off stage or off camera and kills himself. Mm-hmm. And Then the second act is about a young girl that's troubled and goth in the same room, and her dad and her mother and her dad are there, and she's a goth girl, troubled about everything from being bullied to sexuality. She's got green hair and piercings and black nails and the big boots and the typical type young people that get into that.
Right.
And her dad, and they're there because of his great son, who he loves dearly, a football star, a quarterback, has been injured in a football injury, so they're there. He's never approved of his daughter's choices, so there's constant fighting and bickering, and then the father eventually leaves the room, and the mother has kind of been the buffer between them, and she has to side with the father, and they go into the hospital, and Joanna, if you want to, and so she eventually leaves the girl too, but the girl notices she takes a pill, and she says, well, what about me, Mama?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to go, I want to go see it, and she says, no, you stay here, I think it's best. So she stays there in the room, and she makes a decision to take her life. So she saw her mother's pills, her mother left the purse, so she's there popping her mother's tranquilizers and going to kill herself.
Right.
That's the end of the second act. And then the third act, the spirit of the veteran that took his life, who really doesn't know where he's at. He's kind of meandering and wandering. He comes on with smoke, and he's a spirit, so the audience sees him, but the girl doesn't see him, and the parents never see him. So he sees what's going on. He's confused, and he says, "No, wait a minute. What am I? Where am I? What?" And then he sees this young girl, and through the process of just discussion, because the number one thing that people should never do is tell a combat veteran how to fix something.
Right.
I always said, walk a mile in a combat veteran's shoes
right.
before you try and tell them how to walk in yours.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. It's a different experience. So through conversation, he convinces this young girl there's a better choice, but it's too late because she's already gone under. She's already collapsed on the bed just as the parents come back.
Mm-hmm.
And they see her, and they're screaming and hollering, how many does she take, and so forth. And the spirit sees this going on, walks over and reaches over the father's shoulder and touches the girl on the heart and says, it's not your time, little girl.
Right.
And she gasps for air, and suddenly she's back to life, and they're hugging and loving, and again, the spirit kind of meanders and wanders, and a light appears, and he meanders into the light, looks up, and then the light disappears. He's
right.
gone. He's redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great play. It's a great healing play or script, either one. But that's the one I'm working on now. It's called A Soldier's Final Act.
Well, so let me ask you, we're getting close to a break here. If these folks out here listening and want to keep up with you, where do they need to go to? Because I know you've got a lot of social media stuff.
Yeah, on Facebook, Michael Stephen Myers, but I have the web page, which is michaelstephenmyers.com, and let me spell that. That's Michael, of course, but my middle name is spelled S-T-E-P-H-E-N.
Right.
And the last name is M-Y-E-R-S, not
mm-hmm.
M-E-Y, MYERS.com. That, because of COVID, like everybody else, I've been in a standstill. So, but this, I'm hoping that the right people up in New York and so forth will get wind of this play. It's healing, it's timely, it's visceral.
Right.
It's the best thing I've ever written, really, and the biggest tool to help people. PTSD, for instance, I suffer from PTSD.
Right.
Officers handle their own problems, but I've suffered from PTSD and wounds, so I'm another disabled veteran, and I used to keep my head down. But I try and tell people that, I remind veterans especially, that PTSD is your scar. And when you're wounded or you cut yourself, you have a scar to show that you've been healed, and you live with it the rest of your life.
Right.
And that's the same thing. That's what PTSD is. PTSD is the emotional scar that you're going to carry for the rest of your life. So quit running away from it. You know, hold your head up, be proud, and learn to live with it. If we lived without the dignity, then we're insulting those that died in dignity that we left behind, in my case, on those hilltops.
Right.
Sometimes with Iraq and Afghanistan, in buildings or on mountains. They too need to stand up and be proud of what they did, hold their heads up, don't do like I did and walk around in a daze for 10 years. And PTSD, to recognize what it is. If they recognize what it is, they'll stop suffering from it.
Well,
I did when I looked in that mirror.
I'll tell you, I love them, and they're Americans in my book, and they're brothers Americans. And I just think that a lot of these veterans get the short end of the stick, and it don't make no sense to me. But I do appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, and well, for instance, we got refugees coming down. I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And we have refugees from Vietnam,
Right.
and our government, I think it was down in Lucas, Texas, down in the southern part. We brought these Vietnamese refugees back. I love these people, and they were fishermen, so we set them up. Our government gave them $50,000,
Mm-hmm.
and at that time that's a lot of money, 75, and gave them a boat where they could continue their lifestyle. They
Right.
could raise their families and so. But we didn't get anything.
Yeah, that's crazy.
We didn't get anything.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yep.
didn't tell us how to not fight a war. I was trained. I was so well trained.
Mm-hmm.
I was the best the United States had at the time. I led American soldiers. And, we started this conversation proud. The proudest thing I ever did in my life was to lead American soldiers into combat.
Right.
The second proudest thing I did was I was officer in charge of funeral detail, burying our soldiers.
Right.
So then you think, why did I live when so many didn't? That's one of the questions this veteran asked. But why did I live? And then I thought, well, what's my purpose? And then I realized that my writing was helping people.
Right.
It's helping people. So I'm just as proud now of my writing and what's happening with that as I was leading American soldiers and burying American soldiers. And what else could I do in my life? I used to question all the time, why am I here? What's going on? Why did I live?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm discovering why through my work and the way it's helping so many other people. So
Yeah, making a difference in fellow
and go to my
soldier.
go to my webpage. If venues, people, producers, sponsors, whatever. I think I got one here that everybody would definitely benefit from, and I'd love to see it out there.
Well, man, I
So
sure do
appreciate-
appreciate you giving us your time. No doubt. I know you're busy, but we do appreciate your service too.
Yeah, well, I thank you very much for having me on, and give a shout out to my friend Max Cleveland and your neighbor down there.
There you go.
Great guy. Yeah, great guy. He came to Virginia. I was part of his band of brothers when John Kerry was running for office because he was another brother.
Right.
Just like Chris Christopherson.
There you
I
go.
take a lot of pride in his service. A lot of people don't understand how many of those guys serve for our country.
Yeah.
Because here's a rule. Here's a rule people have to remember. The general rule is the ones that talk the most probably saw the least.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we want to continue talking about it? Like, I knew maybe 5,000 Rangers and Special Forces that were in Vietnam in 68, 69. I bet you I've met 100,000 of them in bars.
Right.
Nobody's just a sailor anymore, or a soldier, or a Marine. They're all snipers, recon, SEALs, special ops. They're just so full of crap, most of them. and that I'm not out to bust them, but I just can't talk them because you realize right away that when they're talking to a real soldier, that they're just full of crap.
I know some.
So
my father-in-law actually served in Vietnam, and he don't even discuss it. He won't even. He won't even talk about it at all.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a true thing. The ones that talk the most probably saw the least.
Yeah, and that's it.
I write it. Everything I write is true. Everything I write is true. It's my experiences.
One of
And
the
I
things
guess that's why I'm still here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we were actually outside one time, and an airplane flew over real low, just come through all of a sudden, and he almost jumped in the dirt. I just freaked him out that much from flashbacks or whatever. But we thought he was going to actually jump in the dirt. He was just fixing to jump down. So it's something you don't forget. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they call startle reflex.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to go to fireworks, and after people get to know me, they understand why I don't really look forward to going out and listening to fireworks because it just sounds like a battle.
Yeah. So anyway,
it's not something I want to remember.
Well, man, I'm gonna get back with you and see what's going on. I appreciate your service and I appreciate your time, but we have got to get to a break. But man, you have got a lot of stuff going on, and like I said, I'd like to thank you again for your service and what you're doing now.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and thank you very much.
All right, man, you take care.
Okay.
Thank you for spending a little time with us. And remember, you can tune in every morning at WJULradio.com at 8 a.m. Eastern. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook, The Morning Dish.